Alright, I can explain. It's not the best deck. I do not think it's the best deck. I think there's another deck that deserves this much more, and it's the plants. The new selection pack, heroic champions, and other new additions to Master Duel have finally dropped, and well, they definitely have a bit of an impact on the meta. Now, what it exactly impacts and how they do that, well, let's talk about it right now in this tier list. So first of all, on this tier list, we got Pen Magician. Now, Pen Magician is normally always going to be in the good pilot section because, you know, FTKs, but the FTK is dead. So I feel very tempted to put in Rogue because, well, Pen Magician itself is pretty mid, to be honest, right? Like, the FTK was pretty good. It can build pretty good negates, but what makes a deck good is the fact that the deck should itself have a lot of power with it that a lot of people can use, at least in my personal definition. Pen Magician is great in the right hands, but the right hands aren't everyone, right? Not everyone can pilot this deck and win, and it could be waste for someone, so I feel like it's Rogue. Personally, for me, it's a Rogue deck, but if you ask anyone else, they'll probably still put it in the takes a good pilot thing. I'd probably put Endymion in good pilot, because I think Endymion does have a higher ceiling now, as opposed to previously, compared to Pen Magician, because Pen Magician doesn't have the FTK, so now it's kind of on par with Endymion, which is absolutely nuts going second, but I didn't put Endymion here because finding images and putting them on the tier list is already a bit of a, it's a bit taxing. ABC Dragon Buster, right? Now, ABC Dragon Buster is finally coming off the Forbidden Limited list, so it's going to be at full power theoretically, but the adventure engine, which you play it very often with, is now kind of hampered. We do have Therions, though, so placing this in a tier, it takes a bit, right? I feel like it could be between solid and takes good pilot, although I'm only just building the deck now. I'm getting my Therions in order, I'm gonna get my ABC Dragon Busters crafted, but from experience, it's already pretty much in the mid-rogue section, so now it's kind of just in between here, in my opinion, but depending on what we see in future showings, whether Therions make that much of a difference or not, I think it could even jump to solid, but for now, I'm going to put in takes a good pilot, right? There's a lot of moving parts that, at least I can tell, are in this deck, so it's pretty good. Next deck, Branded Despia. Alright, I can explain. It's not the best deck. I do not think it's the best deck. I think there's another deck that deserves this much more, and it's the plants. Let me explain. I'm not crazy. So, the reason why I put Branded Despia in solid and Branded Predaplant in carries, no, actually, this isn't great. Alright, warning, weird take, Branded Despia is not the best deck. Where should we put both Branded Despia and Branded Predaplant? Because I think Branded Predaplant is pretty solid, but it does take a really good pilot. This deck does have a really high skill ceiling. It's definitely higher than ABC's, in my opinion. There's a lot more the deck can do, in my opinion, right? There's things that set apart Branded Predaplant from Despia, but whether Despia can still compete in the current meta is to be seen. Like, the Despia matchup against Runic is like a 50-50. Like, they banish your Albazes and you're screwed, or they don't and you're fine, right? Because the deck has plenty of removal options with things like Guardian Chimera, or just general back row removal to get rid of fountains and everything. But even then, and it's a deck that doesn't summon very frequently, so I think for now, I will put Branded Despia in solid and takes a good pilot for the Branded Predaplant, but I think in the future, when things calm down, I think Branded Despia is going to go into the Rogue, and the Branded Predaplant will go up here. And now let's talk about Branded Predaplant, why I think it personally should be in solid, but for now, I'll put it in takes a good pilot, right? So, Branded Predaplant, it's a deck that basically integrates a small branded engine alongside general plant shenanigans, right? We run the Predaplants, which are really good at getting fusion stuff out. We just got Ophris to 2. So now it has more consistent ways of searching literally any fusion spell under the moon. So you can take things like Preda Prime Fusion, which in the mirror match or in the match against Despia is absolutely crazy because dark monsters are what Predaplant eats for breakfast. But also Branded Predaplants now have access to Therions, which can be incorporated into a small package. I'm experimenting with it right now. And I think they just have a very high ceiling now. They can put up an Omni Negate, a Banish, a couple of other negates on Mirror Jade, which I think has more utility and is more powerful overall than something like just Mirror Jade and Guardian Chimera Pass. And also, one of the best things about Branded Predaplants, in my opinion, is that they have other things to do other than search Branded Fusion, find Branded Fusion, activate it, and then cry after your Branded Fusion gets ashed, you know? They can search for Instant Fusion, they can use Instant Fusion, it's a combo starter, it's a 1-card combo starter actually. They can also search for Super Poly, search for regular Poly, they can do so much, right? They have they have a lot of potential, more than Branded Despia. Branded Despia feels a lot more linear and just straightforward, so also counterplay is a lot more predictable against Branded Despia as opposed to Branded Predaplant, but for now, again, it kind of takes the cake above Branded Predaplant. Again, for now, I'm going to continue saying this. Next, we have Salads. Now, Salads are in between Takes a Good Pilot and Rogue. I'd like to say that they're better than Pendulum Magician, because I have played Salads before, and they have pretty good things going on for them, right? Access code, update jammer access code lines are really easy to access with this deck, right? You can also make Heat Soul, which can get you more draw power in certain cases. Also, setting counter traps that can Omni Negate, it's pretty reliable. It can also draw pretty well, again, with the aforementioned Heat Soul. You could always just devolve into Heat Soul control. You can play a lot of hand traps, a lot of board breakers. It's pretty flexible, and I'm very sure that in the right setups and the right matchups, with the right side deck, you could even tech in Super Poly against other Cyberse decks, because there's another Cyberse decks that really takes the cake coming up next. But I think this is a pretty good place for Salads. If I were to really reach though, I would say it takes a good pilot. Now, to make sure I clarify over here, if we were to equate this to what Master Duel meta ranks their stuff, carries is tier 0, tier 1. Solid is like tier 1 to 1.5. Takes a good pilot is like tier 2 to tier 3. Rogue is Rogue, of course, but it also may include tier 3 threats. Like Salads, I think, are personally sort of tier 3. And then mid is like, no, you should not play him. There's no point in playing him, right? So that's where I stand with Salads, right? Now, anything that's above mid is actually pretty decent. Like, you can take it and win with it, but I would probably suggest something in Takes a Good Pilot. Also because if a deck takes a good pilot, there's a lot to learn. There's a lot to do with that deck, and it's just, my opinion, much more fun. It makes for a funner experience of Yu-Gi-Oh! Next, we have Mathmech. Okay, Mathmech just got a new card, so if you don't know, right, we got the new selection pack, but we also got some more updates to secret packs. The Sky Striker pack got some new cards, which I'll talk about Sky Strikers in a hot minute, but they also got more Mathmech cards. We got one Mathmech card that is a Foolish, that is an Extender, and that is a Searcher all in one. It's an ultra rare, sure, but the deck is still pretty affordable. I think this card is nuts. It's basically, how do I explain this? So Power of the Elements is a set where it's Tierlist and Sprite came out. And we basically entered a 3-deck format where a majority of people were either playing Sprite or Tier, and there was a good subsection of people who were still winning playing Mathmech. Mathmech can now extremely consistently access what we can call Trishula from Wish, right? It can loop a card from your opponent's hand, and it can also send cards from the field to the graveyard. Does it really consistently, has great rank 4 access, has great synchro access, and it's also really consistent, really good OTK potential. It, in the right hands, can be absolutely fucking monstrous, and it's actually pretty easy to pilot. So I'd say, for now, it's solid, but again, it depends. Like, I could finish my ABC Dragon Buster deck, or I could pivot into Mathmech, and from my personal experimentation, I guess I'll sort of give an opinion on that. And it's a Cyberse deck too, so obviously you have access to things like Transcode Talker, you have access code, there's a lot of flexibility to be had, so take from it what you will. I think this deck is really solid. Next, okay, Dinomorphia. The art's really confusing, I had to find something pretty good. This deck is very much in between solid and takes a good pilot. Because I fought against this in the Challenger Cup. I was in the Challenger Cup a few days ago. I was in Ambushes and Relays tournament. Ambushes tournament, I faced against Dinomorphia. I almost won, but Dinomorphia is really good. There's a lot going for it. It's got negates, it's got counter traps, it's got consistency, it's got OTK potential. It also has really powerful board control. Dinomorphia Rexterm is nuts. It's a skill drain on legs that can also help you OTK really well. It's got a really good body on it, and Dinomorphia, all of them have floating effects. The one thing that Dinomorphia does struggle with is making decisions, like what do you dump, right? What kind of traps are you going to put to the graveyard with Diplos, for example? What do you want in rotation? What kinds of removal? Because Dinomorphia can choose a lot, but it's the decisions that really matter, right? In the right scenarios, even something like Predaplant can overpower it, but I lost in that match because the dude just happened to have Solemn, right? But speaking of that, the deck can also incorporate lots of generically good traps. It's also just a dark focused deck only, so at the same time you can run things like Gozen. there's a lot to be had with this deck. It's just that, again, do anything wrong, have a little missteps, and you could get OTK'd by a really low attack monster. You gotta be really careful. I played this deck before they got Rexsturm and Frenzy, and that's the issue I encountered the most with that deck, and I still think that with the nature of how it plays, where it halves its life points constantly, that's where it really deserves to be, you know? Next, Dragon Link. I have not seen anyone play this deck in a while. Maybe I saw someone play Thunder Dragon Link like a couple matches ago today, but this deck, it's gonna be and takes a good pilot. Again, ceiling, it's quite high. It's the nature of the deck. It's got a lot going for it, but I'm not seeing it at all, right? Maybe, at least in my personal experience, but I'm still seeing it top tournaments, so I think it deserves a spot over there. But then again, I can't say too much for Dragon Link, to be honest, because I don't really know what they really do. That's really where I'm going to put this. Now, Drytron is going to be... It's a hard decision. Like, Drytron never really changed. People just stopped playing it. So I think it definitely goes into solid, or at the very least, it's at the top of takes a good pilot. I'm tempted to put it somewhere near Dinomorphia, but the thing is, the Drytron combo is a lot more fragile than Dinomorphia, because realistically, you have to negate their Mubeta Fafnir, or prevent them from just starting to search rituals, right? An Ash, a well-timed Veiler, a well-timed Imperm, or even something like Dark River No More can dismantle them. Still can for a lot of decks, but it really does struggle. Like, it's got that one thing going for it, the Herald of Ultimateness stuff going, and then maybe some Draconids OTKs, but otherwise, unless Libromancers really do change something, I don't see much going for this deck. So for this reason, I think I'll actually put it in between Predaplant and ABC, right? Because ABC and Striker, ABC and Dragon Link, they're more unknown factors, but I have experience with Drytron, and I think that they're fine. They're pretty solid, but overall, I think the decks above them are above them for a reason. Next, Striker. This is difficult. I have a lot of experience playing against Striker rather than playing as it, and it's the most irritating thing ever because they always end up drawing their outs or something. It's the most perpetually annoying thing about this deck. But this deck has gotten access to some really interesting tools. So we have Linkage, it's a quick play spell. You can send a card from your field to the graveyard and then special summon a Sky Striker Ace from your extra deck to your extra monster zone for free, not a once per turn. So you could always just use Ray, tag into something else. Then after that, that thing again gets sent to the graveyard with Linkage, summon Kagari, add Linkage back, attack with Kagari, and then after that use Linkage again. You can see the lines, and then you can always just float into Shizuku at the very end of the turn during the end of any phase 2, get more stuff going on. It can OTK now, which is nuts. The deck needed that, and we also do have the Kaiju for Sky Strikers, which is Sky Striker Ace Hamp or something, I believe, which is interesting utility. The deck itself, I still think, is in between Rogue and Mid, but I think for the purpose of this, I will put it in Rogue, right? Because again, I just happen to always run into the deck, and they always happen to draw the out. They also have Kagari to 2 now, which makes the deck incredibly powerful now. They don't have to rely on top decking that Pot of Avarice, which means it's now less of a luck factor when my opponent just so happens to have drawn both copies of Pot of Avarice. It annoys me. I hate I hate Sky Strikers if it wasn't already obvious. Next, Runic. I think this is the deck that goes into carries. You can play this in a lot of different variants. People are still sort of experimenting with Synchro Runic and stuff, with Fabled, with Punk, with Sword Soul even, but on its own, as a floodgate, as a scapegoat for floodgates, Runic is powerful. It's really powerful, right? You can protect things by just using something like, let's say, Hugin or Moonin or even Gary, which can float. It stays alive for long. It has the best grind game, and it can also banish all your combo pieces, right? Especially when it comes to strategies like Branded Despia, where they have cards they require to resolve or to be used, like, let's say, Albaz. If you deck them out, if you get rid of their Albazes, they're dead, right? Decks like that actually suffer a lot, and Branded Predaplant isn't victim to that as much because they don't just use Branded Fusion Pass, but again, the deck just has so much utility. Fountain is nuts, everything about the deck's nuts. I played just a version where you only play Runic cards and like a couple of battle traps, which is very annoying, I'll admit, it's very annoying to play against, but the deck's just too nuts, right? Sprites come in, and this deck is genuinely monstrous. Okay, next, Labyrinth. This deck over here, the art that I have for Labyrinth over here, If the card in that art would be in the game, I put it in solid, but for now it takes a good pilot. I'll put it at the midsection, right? I'll put it up below Drytron because I know Drytron has the higher ceiling, but Labyrinth is still pretty good. I don't know how it stacks up against ABC Dragon Buster or things like Dragon Link, but overall, very solid deck. It's a deck that basically has the same old like loop of I'm going to destroy some of your stuff and constantly summon more, and I'm going to rip a card from your hand, and the strength is that it can do this every turn, but the disadvantage is that it takes a while to set up all your traps and everything, and it's also kind of dependent on your opening hand. It's not the most consistent thing in the world, but the deck itself is still pretty competent. It doesn't care about the extra decks, so you can just fill it up with really good utility targets like Dogmatica Punishment, or you could even put things like Ultimate Slayers, but I wouldn't really advise you doing so. Until we get the Lovely Lady of the Labyrinth, or the one that lets you extend and search a trap, this deck is pretty good, but it takes a pilot. It requires good piloting skills and good decisions to be made in order to then make it to the point where you can establish your loop of destruction and reincarnating your traps and everything and all that. It takes a while. Next, Libromancer. This is the biggest wild card. Now, this deck I want to put in mid so bad, but I don't know much of how it operates. If we get when we get Mikanko, it's gonna probably shoot up to takes a good pilot to maybe even solid, but for now, I will put it in mid because I don't know what it really does. It's only got one solid line I can see, and that's Doombroker, precisely searching or setting from your deck to your field things like your Libromancer Intervention and other things, which are basically just like negates and yoinks, which isn't bad, but the deck doesn't really have much going for it on its own. As a hybrid of Drytron, I feel like it could be a bit too bricky, a bit too sacky, so if we were to even rank that as a hybrid, I'd put it at low rogue at best, but I don't see the point in playing Libromancer, and Konami decided to just gut the deck. It's not even that good now, and they've already put the Ritual Field spell. Yeah, they use a field spell to Ritual, by the way. They put the main Searcher, they put Doombroker, all at Ultra. They did this deck dirty. Honestly, they did not deserve this. Next, this is Lyrilusc, but I'm gonna just regard this as a blanket term for pure Lyrilusc, Bird Up, and the Angel of Mischief FTK. And I would say this is at Rogue. Top of the Rogue ladder, maybe not as good as Salads because the OTK potential is much higher in Salads, and I think that's very valuable in this metagame. If you can't kill someone in one turn, they're gonna out-advantage you. We're moving to that sort of meta now, at least in my, just what I observe personally, right? They're interesting, right? They lost barrier statue lines, so you can't summon that off of Simorg, but you can still Apex Avion. There's potential there to Mist Valley, Thunderbird, Apex Avion, negate loops. It's consistent-ish, but sometimes it just really struggles. I think that's a good position for it. Next, Madolche. Okay, Madolche, I play this deck and I love it. I'm quite biased, but I do feel like they're at the top end of Takes a Good Pilot. I took this into a tournament and I did pretty decent, actually. So, from what I can tell, Madolche, they're not that great going first. That's their one weakness so far, and it's only applicable to this current meta, because their end board consists of like a negate and a couple of DD Crows by shuffling cards back into the deck from the graveyard, but when it comes to tier limit meta, this becomes much better, automatically, and it would automatically shoot up to solid. But this deck is nuts at going second, but requires a good pilot to do going second, because again, decisions to be made, there's some weird locks that are established, right? We don't have the Vernus Sylphs yet, and the status of Madolche as a D-shifter deck isn't as powerful until, yet again, we have Sprite meta, which it's relevant in the Sprite matchup because of Elf, and tier limit matchup. So for this reason, I think it takes a good pilot. It's not better than Dinomorphia in my opinion. I'm sorry, Madolche boys, but I think Dinomorphia just has a lot more answers to situations. It's better going first, and I think regardless, even though this meta is shifting to more towards a grind game, I still do think the first turn is really a tone setter. I mean, that's how it is for Yu-Gi-Oh, but it is more in this meta than it will be in the future, in my opinion at least. Next, we have Sword Soul. This deck automatically goes into solid. It's really easy to pilot, right? It could be put in carries in previous metas, but for now it's in solid, right? I would put this actually, it could be higher, it could be lower than Branded Despia, it depends. Like having access, the main decision you have to make is not is basically, do you want to make Chijiao plus Barone, plus Chengying, or plus Longwan, right? Whether you want to get those extra banishes and burns, which is pretty relevant in the Dinomorphia matchup, to say the least. Do you want to get access to just a free Omni negate, or do you want to get more board control and board presence with Chengying? It really depends, and that decision can really change games, but it's really consistent. It's got access to Protoss, which can counter a good number of decks, although it doesn't counter Runic, which is why Runic's on the top. And it's a good deck. It's got really good going second potential because of things like Yazi, and Longwan to 2 doesn't really do much to it. Like, that's at least from my observations. It's still really solid, right? It's having better conversion rates than Branded Despia, but I'm still hesitant to put it above because I personally just have more experience with Branded Despia, and it feels like they have more answers, and they don't summon as much. They're not as prone to Nibiru, so they kind of influence the meta in that sort of way. So I'd put them there. Alright, then we got Floowandereeze. I do think this deck is probably second best in Rogue. It could be put in Takes a Good Pilot. I do personally own Floowandereeze, or I did own it until I dusted it. Sorry about that. It's a good deck. It's a good deck, for sure. It lost Barrier Statue, but what it lost there, it kind of rejuvenated the deck, because now the deck can focus on what I think is the more important aspects, which is balancing card advantage, controlling what you have in the banish pile in your hand. It's got a kite. It basically can kite your opponent during their turn. It can play during their turn, basically. You have access to DD Crows in the form of Stree. You have M-Pen, which is anti-link shenanigans, which is really powerful and everything. I think this deck has lots going for it, but it's also on the brickier side, and again, I don't have as much experience. Thinking about the decks that are on the top, though, I do feel like this deck at least deserves to be put above Labyrinth. Right? I think Flu has more going for it than Labyrinth. I feel like it. But in the Flu Labyrinth matchup, I do think Labyrinth wins. Yeah, I'm pretty happy with that spot. Next, Prank Kids. This deck just blipped out of existence. No one plays it anymore. I don't know what's going on. But Prank Kids, I'd say, does take a really good pilot now. Although I think it's more in Rogue. Like, it's better than Sky Strikers, don't get me wrong. It's debatable whether it's better than Pen Vision or not. I'd probably... gotta think about this. I'd probably put it over there. Because they did lose DPE, like, without the draws, with the Destiny Hero Celestial, with it banned, it's very hard to stay up and relevant in the grand game, which things like Runic keep you in the grand game form. Brand Despia keeps you in the grand game. A lot of decks right now that are doing well can do well because they can survive the first couple turns and then extend it for a long period of time, which I don't think Prank Kids has the longevity. I don't think so. Like, it's a control combo deck, but a lot of the strengths that it had with the virtue of it being a pile deck are now gone. Next, Therions. Okay, this deck for now is mid. We still don't have Punk Deerno. I'm questioning why, but if it does, it would go into solid, I think. Again, you have access to really good synchros and everything with the Punk engine, with Deernote and everything, but for now, it's just going to be in mid. It's interesting, to say the least. That's all I will say. We do need things like Psychic Edge Punisher and whatever, and other really good generic syncos, but for now, it's just kind of, I put it there. Adams, I'd put in solid. They're doing really good recently in the Challenger Cup and everything. They are really good. Branded, not branded, Block Dragon. It's pretty good. It's been put to 1 though, so it's slightly hampered, but I don't think that really does much against the 40 card variant. The 60 card variant does suffer a little bit, but now they're just going to move away from grass. I think this deck's still pretty solid. I've played it a little bit. The end boards are crazy that it can just kind of win the game automatically. It's kind of like a Herald Ultimate in this situation. Like, Adamancipator and Drytron are pretty comparable in terms of their strength, but I think Adamancipator just has it better with the excess toolbox options they have access to, right? Next, okay, this deck is really weird. Sunavalon. So we don't have Rikas yet. The Rikas might help, but for now, I think it does take a really good pilot. I'd say I put them above the Drytrons. Now, what sucks about Sunavalons now is that they use up their extra deck like crazy. So they have a lack of access to generic solutions to problems, but they have Therions now, which they can access very consistently, and the Therions themselves help solve a lot of issues. You have access to the adventure shenanigans, you have access to the Therions now, 2 Omni Negate engines, and then you also have basically a Dark Lunamoron or skill drain on steroids. You have a bounce, you have a card that prevents you from attacking, and it also can OTK really easily. I think this deck has a lot of potential, but then again, we have to see its performance. Now we have Phantom Knights. I have not faced against this deck in a long time, but from what I can tell, they feel like a very deck. Like, I would put them below Pen Position. I'd say they're slightly better than Sky Strikers, right? They got more things going for them. They do still have a really good extra deck, but again, I can't really speak to this much, but this is where I feel like they go right now. Next, Tri-Brigade. This is a bit more of a blanket term for literally all Tri-Brigade variants, but for now, I'll use this icon to speak for just Tri-Brigade Zoo, which is the best variant aside from Lyrilusc. I think that, again, they belong over here with the Lyrilusc, because Lyrilusc is kind of just a representative for Bird Up. So yeah, it's interchangeable. I don't really think, like, it has the same sort of things going on with Lyrilusc, at least in terms of why it deserves this position. I think it can sneak up to Takes a Good Pilot. It does have a lot going for it, but I think it does get beat out by a different variant, and that would be Scareclaw. I would put this above Flu. So try Scareclaw is really good. It's got access to Barone. It can access things like Mirror Jade. It can if it wants to, but it gets a little bit weird that way. It has access to all the Tri-Brigade shenanigans, Revolt, Shurig. It doesn't get hit very badly by Tenki and Fractal being a 2, at least to my knowledge. And overall, the deck has a lot going for it. It might lose power when it comes to later formats with sprites with tiers, but I'm pretty sure you can also play Tri-Brigades and sprites. So again, who knows? But I'd like to confidently put them over there. They have a lot going for them. They got a high ceiling. They do take a good pilot, but they don't have a necessarily low floor. They have a pretty, they have a pretty low floor actually. It's not that hard to understand how a Tri-Brigade Scareclaw deck works. It's more of like managing things in the mid game and everything that will put this deck through the twist compared to all the other decks. But so far, I think I'm pretty happy with the placements I have over here. If there's any decks you want me to talk about in the comment section, then go ahead, comment. I can talk about it with you in the comment section. DM me on Twitter if you like anything. And if you want some more discussion-oriented content, then probably check out my extra deck rule change video in response to Farfa. It'll be on screen right now for the end. And yeah, bye-bye.